What if the darkest part of you was not your enemy but your greatest source of strength? What if the very impulses you were taught to suppress, your rage, your envy, your hunger for recognition, your pride, were the very fuel that could carry you into greatness? If only you learned how to wield them. And what if, in refusing to face these forces, you condemned yourself not to goodness but to weakness, drifting helplessly in a world where others, less honest, seize the power you have denied? This is the paradox of the human soul. Every culture has told the story of the monster within. In myths, the dragon guards the treasure. In scriptures, Cain's sin crouches at the door. In psychology, Carl Jung calls it the shadow. And in the life of every man and woman, it is the part of us that we hide, sometimes from others, sometimes even from ourselves. The shadow is not evil in itself, it is raw energy. But energy untamed corrupts, while energy faced and integrated transforms. To deny it is to make it grow in secret, like a weed left unchecked until it cracks the foundation of the house. To embrace it without conscience is to become the very tyrant you once feared. The challenge then is one of balance. How do you own your monster without becoming a villain? Philosophers and poets have long warned us of the dangers of ignoring the darker self. The Greek tragedians wrote of hubris, excessive pride that blinds a man to his limits. Plato, in the Republic, described the tyrant as a man enslaved by his own appetites, unable to control the beast within. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, reminded himself daily, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He understood that obstacles, even the ones inside us, are not to be destroyed, but transformed. And then came Nietzsche, who declared, "He who fights monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster." He added the haunting line, "When you gaze long into the abyss gazes back into you." What Nietzsche described was the danger of confronting darkness without wisdom. In fighting external monsters, one awakens one's own. Centuries later, Carl Jung gave us the most precise map. The shadow is everything you refuse to admit about yourself. Perhaps it is aggression or jealousy or lust or a hunger for domination. Perhaps it is weakness, cowardice, or the desire to be taken care of when you pretend to be independent. The shadow is what your conscious ego refuses to acknowledge, yet it shapes your behavior in ways more powerful than reason. Sigmund Freud, Jung's teacher, saw this too. He spoke of repression, the pushing down of forbidden desires, and how what is repressed returns in disguise, in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in sudden irrational rage. The shadow always finds a way to leak out. Modern psychology confirms it. The more you suppress anger, the more it simmers until it explodes in destructive ways. The more you deny envy, the more you sabotage those you admire. The more you pretend not to crave power, the more you project villainy onto others, while secretly acting it out yourself. Look around our world, and you will see shadow denied and shadow misused everywhere. In politics, leaders who claim to serve justice but are secretly consumed by greed and vengeance. In corporations, executives who preach values while crushing competition ruthlessly in the dark. In personal lives, people who wear the mask of kindness but erupt in cruelty when threatened. The news overflows with examples. The fall of Hollywood icons revealed how carefully polished images hid predatory appetites. In recent years, social media influences rise preaching authenticity, while behind the screen they are consumed by insecurity, manipulation, and exploitation. History, too, is filled with this lesson. Adolf Hitler, Stalin, and countless tyrants embodied shadows unleashed without conscience. Their repressed wounds and resentments festered into monstrous ideologies. But on the other side, men like Martin Luther King Jr. faced the rage of injustice, yet sublimated it into a non-violent force that changed the world. Both drew from the shadow, but one became villain, the other visionary. But this is not only about great leaders or notorious tyrants, it is about you. The shadow is not some abstract concept. It lives in your daily life. When you avoid conflict because you fear rejection, when you gossip to mask envy, when you sabotage opportunities because deep down you believe you are unworthy, that is the shadow ruling you in silence. The question is not whether you have a shadow, you do. The question is whether you will let it control you unconsciously or whether you will face it, own it and channel it. This is why shadow integration matters, because without it your potential remains locked in chains, and with it you risk corruption unless you tread carefully. The stakes are nothing less than the story of your life. Will you be master of your monster, or will your monster master you? There is a way forward, and it is not denial nor surrender. The way is integration, to recognize the dark energy within and to give it ethical channels for expression. Anger can become courage. Pride can become ambition for excellence. Desire for power can become leadership in service of others. Even envy can become inspiration to grow. The difference between villain and sage lies not in whether they have a shadow, but in how they use it. In the parts to come, we will walk this path together. First, we will explore the philosophical and psychological roots of the shadow, from Plato's cave to Jung's archetypes, from Stoic resilience to Nietzsche's abyss. Then we will see how shadows left unchecked create villains in history, in society, in our own private lives. Next, we will uncover methods of integration, practical, ethical, transformative, drawn from Stoicism, therapy and self-mastery practices. Finally, we will arrive at a haunting but hopeful conclusion: how to own your monster without letting it own you. The monster is already here. The question is whether you will deny it, unleash it blindly, or learn to ride it like a tamed beast. Powerful, dangerous, but under your command. To understand the shadow, we must travel backward, not only into our own memories but into the lineage of thought that has shaped how humanity sees itself. The shadow is not a modern discovery, it is an ancient companion. Across cultures, religions and philosophies, human beings have wrestled with the reality that within us dwells both light and darkness. Imagine Plato's famous allegory of the cave. Prisoners are chained, forced to watch shadows cast upon the wall. To them, the shadows are reality. But the philosopher who breaks free realizes that the shadows are only projections of real objects beyond the fire. Now consider this. Is the shadow we fear inside ourselves not also a projection? What we disown, repress, or deny takes on distorted forms. We see it in others, accuse them of what we refuse to see in ourselves. The jealous person accuses others of envy. The angry man condemns another's temper. The hypocrite rages against hypocrisy. Plato did not speak in the language of Freud or Jung, but he gave us the metaphor. The shadows we see on the wall are our own unacknowledged truths. Aristotle sought balance. He argued that every virtue lies between two vices: courage between cowardice and recklessness, generosity between stinginess and waste. The same principle applies to the shadow. Deny anger entirely and you collapse into cowardice. Indulge it recklessly and you become violent, but harness it and you find courage. The shadow is raw material. Virtue is the art of shaping it. This is why Aristotle's golden mean is not just a moral principle, but a guide for shadow integration. The monster must not be killed or released. It must be tamed. The Stoics, too, knew of the monster within. Seneca wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." He was pointing to the inner demons of fear, anger, and desire, shadows that distort reality. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and Stoic philosopher, kept a journal reminding himself to remain rational when passions surged. His meditations are a manual of shadow work, an emperor confronting rage, pride, lust, and despair within his own heart. For the Stoics, power lay in self-mastery. They did not deny passion, they trained it. Epictetus told his students, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom was not the absence of chains on the body, but of chains on the soul. The shadow unacknowledged enslaves us. The shadow integrated liberates us. Fast forward to Nietzsche. He saw the danger not of weakness, but of strength misdirected. He understood that repression can create sickness. He warned that morality, when it denies human drives entirely, creates slave morality, breeding resentment. The man who suppresses his hunger for greatness becomes bitter, and that bitterness turns destructive. Nietzsche's warning is stark. In fighting external monsters, you risk becoming one yourself. Why? Because in your battle, you awaken your own shadow. The abyss gazes back. The solution, he argued, was not denial but transformation, the creation of the Übermensch, the higher man who channels his instincts into new values. Shadow energy, in Nietzsche's vision, was not to be crushed but reforged. It was Carl Jung who gave the most detailed map. He named it the shadow. For Jung, the shadow is everything the conscious self refuses to acknowledge. It contains not only what is evil, but also what is undeveloped. Creativity, passion, courage. These often hide in the same place as rage, envy, and lust. To reject the shadow is to reject half of one's humanity. Jung used myth to explain this. Think of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the respectable doctor who represses his darker impulses until they split off and destroy him. Think of myths where the hero must enter the underworld, Hercules facing Hades, Orpheus descending for Eurydice. The descent is always a journey into the shadow. Jung insisted the shadow cannot be destroyed, only integrated. To fail in this task is to live as half a person. To succeed is to become whole. Before Jung, Freud saw the same principle in repression. He described how forbidden desires, when pushed down, return disguised in dreams, symptoms, or neuroses. The return of the repressed is another way of saying the shadow always leaks through. Freud believed civilization itself rests on repression. Society demands that individuals suppress their instincts to live together. But repression has a cost. What is hidden builds pressure until it bursts. Wars, riots, scandals, these are not only political phenomena, but eruptions of collective shadow. Then there is Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialist, atheist, rebel. Sartre did not speak of the shadow, but he spoke of self-deception, bad faith. To live in bad faith is to lie to yourself, to deny your freedom, to pretend you are a fixed thing rather than a being responsible for choice. The shadow thrives in bad faith. It whispers, "You are not responsible. It is not you. It is the world. It is others. It is fate." Sartre forces us to admit, the shadow is ours, and we are responsible for what we do with it. Long before psychology, religion spoke of the shadow in parables. The Bible says, "Sin crouches at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Islam warns of the nafs, the lower self, and calls believers to discipline it. Hinduism speaks of maya, the illusion that blinds us from our true nature. Buddhism warns against the three poisons, greed, anger, and delusion. All describe the same truth. There is a monster within, and life demands we confront it. But why does this matter today? Because our world is awash with shadows, unintegrated. Political polarization thrives on projection, each side accusing the other of hatred, greed, and corruption, often the very traits they harbor themselves. Online culture rewards outrage, feeding the shadows' hunger for dominance and spectacle. Even in personal lives, social media becomes a stage for shadow play, envy masked as inspiration, cruelty disguised as honesty, lust clothed in self-expression. We live in an age where shadows are not hidden but broadcast, yet still denied. We see it everywhere, but never in ourselves. From Plato to Sartre, from Jung to the Stoics, the message is clear. The shadow is real, ancient, and inescapable. It is the dragon guarding your treasure, the abyss that gazes back, the sin crouching at the door. It is the hidden part of the self, dangerous, yes, but also the source of power. The question that remains is what happens when we fail to face it? What happens when individuals, leaders, and entire societies deny their monster? That is where our journey now turns, into the study of villains born from shadows unleashed. If the shadow is raw energy, then to ignore it is to let it fester in darkness. Left unexamined, it turns poisonous, spilling out in ways that shock not only others, but often the very person possessed by it. History, myth, and psychology converge on this lesson. Unintegrated shadows do not disappear. They grow, distort, and consume. The Bible gives us one of the earliest cautionary tales. Cain, the firstborn of Adam and Eve, seethes with jealousy at his brother Abel's offering being accepted by God while his own is rejected. Scripture puts it plainly. Sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Cain refuses to integrate that envy. Instead, he allows it to master him. The result is the first murder. Cain's shadow was not monstrous in itself. Envy is common to us all. But left unacknowledged, it grew until it demanded blood. Cain becomes the archetype of the man ruled by what he will not face. History is littered with the wreckage of shadows unleashed on a massive scale. Adolf Hitler carried within him the resentments of personal failure, the humiliation of a defeated nation, and the projection of his own inadequacies onto an imagined enemy. His refusal to face his shadow, his own despair, envy, and impotence, turned into genocidal ideology. Stalin too projected his paranoia outward, seeing betrayal in every friend until he murdered millions in the name of security. The tyrant is not born only from power but from shadow. He who cannot rule himself seeks to rule the world, and does so with violence. This pattern is not confined to the past. In our own age, political figures rise by channeling the repressed frustrations of the masses. Leaders exploit unowned shadows of entire populations, economic fear, racial resentment, cultural envy. Social media algorithms reward the loudest expressions of outrage, amplifying the worst impulses. What is hidden in individuals becomes weaponized at scale. The mob, Nietzsche warned, does not think, it feels, and feelings unexamined become frenzy. The internet, then, has become the new arena for collective shadow play. Outrage spreads faster than reason. Falsehoods gain traction, not because they are true, but because they resonate with the monsters within us. But it is not only tyrants and mobs. The same dynamic unfolds quietly in homes, offices, relationships. Consider the man who insists he is selfless, yet secretly resents everyone around him for not appreciating his sacrifices. His unacknowledged pride and anger erupt in passive-aggressive cruelty. Or the woman who denies her ambition, pretending to be humble, while undermining anyone who succeeds near her. How many marriages crumble not from lack of love, but from shadows never admitted? insecurities, lusts, fears, all left to rot in silence until they poison intimacy. How many careers are sabotaged because envy, fear of failure, or hunger for recognition lurk unspoken beneath the surface? Unintegrated shadows do not merely harm others, they fracture the self. Jung noted that when the shadow is denied, it manifests in neuroses. The person who represses anger develops anxiety. The one who represses desire becomes depressed. The one who represses fear develops compulsions. Modern therapy confirms this. Trauma survivors who bury their pain often find it returns as flashbacks, nightmares, or sudden panic. Children taught never to express emotion become adults incapable of intimacy, their hidden rage turning inward into self-hatred. The villain is not always external. Sometimes it is the slow suicide of a life ruled by unacknowledged darkness. Our stories reflect this truth. Consider Star Wars. Anakin Skywalker begins as a promising Jedi but cannot face his fear of loss and his hunger for control. Those shadows denied consume him until he becomes Darth Vader. Or Marvel's Hulk. Bruce Banner suppresses his anger until it erupts as a monster. The stories endure because they are archetypal. Every person is Anakin, every person is Banner. The shadow ignored will break free. Even contemporary scandals remind us. Public figures who build spotless images often fall hardest when hidden desires surface. The preacher who rails against sin but is caught in secret indulgence, the politician who promises integrity but is undone by corruption, the celebrity undone by addiction. The shadow is relentless, it will be known. Consider also the corporate world. Executives who deny their ambition cloak it in mission statements but pursue profit at all costs. Employees repress resentment until it explodes in sabotage or burnout. Workplaces become breeding grounds for shadow wars, gossip, backstabbing, envy masked as competition. Companies collapse not merely from bad strategy, but from leaders and teams refusing to face the monsters driving their behavior. Jung warned not only of personal but of collective shadows. When nations repress their past crimes, they resurface in new conflicts. When cultures deny injustice, resentment festers until it erupts in violence. Colonial powers denied their greed, calling it civilizing. The shadow returned in cycles of rebellion and bloodshed. The United States denied its racial wounds. The shadow returned in cycles of rebellion and bloodshed. The United States denied its racial wounds, and the shadow returns in protests and unrest. Wherever there is denial, there will be eruption. Whether mythic or modern, the pattern is the same. Repression, a feeling, desire, or fear, is denied. Projection, it is seen in others, blamed outwardly. Eruption, the pressure builds until it bursts, often destructively. Possession, the person becomes the shadow they refused to face. This is the anatomy of the villain. The monster, unacknowledged, eventually takes control. Cain kills Abel, Hitler builds camps. Anakin turns to Vader. The humble becomes bitter. The kind becomes cruel. The faithful becomes fanatic. It is tempting to think of villains as them, not us. But this is the final trap. The moment you believe you are immune is the moment your shadow begins its work. Every tyrant once thought himself righteous. Every hypocrite once believed his mask. The challenge, then, is not only to recognize villains in history, but to prevent the villain within ourselves. The question is not whether you have a shadow, you do. The question is whether you will deny it until it possesses you, or whether you will confront it and give it form. This brings us to the next step. If ignoring the shadow breeds villains, how do we instead become heroes? How do we use this dark energy without being consumed by it? What practices, philosophies, and disciplines can help us face the monster and integrate it ethically? That is where we turn next, to the pathways of shadow integration. If unintegrated shadows create villains, then the only way forward is integration. But integration does not mean indulgence. It does not mean surrendering to every impulse or excusing cruelty as authenticity. To integrate is to acknowledge, to transform, and to direct. It is to face the monster, learn its language, and teach it yours. The first step in integration is honesty. Jung observed that the shadow is formed because we cannot bear to admit certain truths about ourselves. Honesty begins by asking, "What do I hide? Do you pretend you are humble while secretly craving recognition? Do you claim you are kind while seething with resentment? Do you declare indifference while burning with envy?" Socrates' dictum, "The unexamined life is not worth living," is not only philosophy but shadow work. Examination means dragging the hidden into the light. Journaling, therapy, even confiding in a trusted friend. These acts of naming strip the shadow of its disguise. A monster named is no longer as dangerous. Projection is the shadow's favorite trick. What we despise in others is often what we refuse to see in ourselves. The impatient boss, the arrogant colleague, the manipulative partner, how often are these mirrors? Integration requires catching projection in the act. When anger flares at another's flaw, ask, "Is this also mine?" This is where Marcus Aurelius's Stoic practice is powerful. He would remind himself each morning, "You will meet selfish men, dishonest men, arrogant men, but they cannot harm your soul unless you let them." His exercise was double-edged, preparing for others' shadows while acknowledging his own. Integration is not about suppression. Suppressed anger does not vanish, it mutates. But anger acknowledged can be redirected. The civil rights leaders of the 20th century knew this. Martin Luther King Jr. faced his anger at injustice, but instead of violence, he channeled it into disciplined non-violence, a force stronger than rage. Psychologists call this sublimation, transforming raw impulses into higher expressions. Sexual desire can become art, ambition can become innovation, envy can become motivation. Freud saw sublimation as the engine of civilization itself. What matters is giving the energy a channel that builds rather than destroys. Integration requires practice, not a single revelation. Ancient traditions provided rituals for this: fasting, confession, meditation, martial training. Each forced individuals to confront their impulses and give them form. Today, therapy can serve this role, guiding individuals to uncover buried wounds. Cognitive behavioral techniques teach us to reframe destructive thought patterns. Mindfulness practices, borrowed from Buddhism, allow us to sit with difficult emotions without judgment, watching them rise and fall like waves. Even physical practices, martial arts, athletics, dance, can become channels for shadow energy, teaching the body to carry what the mind fears. But energy alone is not enough. Without ethical anchoring, integration risks corruption. Nietzsche's vision of the Übermensch inspired not only creativity, but also misinterpretation by those who used it to justify domination. Ethics ensures that power serves life rather than consumes it. Here, the Stoics and religious traditions converge. For Marcus Aurelius, virtue was the guiding star: justice, courage, moderation, wisdom. For Christianity, love of neighbor transforms wrath into compassion. For Buddhism, compassion is the antidote to greed and delusion. Without an ethical compass, integration veers toward villainy. With it, dark energy becomes luminous. History gives us models. Abraham Lincoln, often described as melancholic, faced his despair but used it to cultivate humility and resolve. Nelson Mandela confronted not only apartheid but also his own anger, choosing reconciliation over vengeance. Both men had shadows, grief, rage, ambition, but they forged them into instruments of leadership. Contrast them with those who lacked such integration. Napoleon, brilliant and ambitious, became enslaved by his hunger for conquest. His refusal to anchor ambition in restraint led to ruin. The difference was not talent, but integration. How do we apply this today? Consider the workplace. An ambitious employee may suppress hunger for recognition, pretending to be just a team player only to sabotage colleagues. Integration would mean admitting ambition openly, channeling it into leadership and innovation. Or consider relationships. Jealousy denied breeds mistrust. Jealousy acknowledged can lead to honest communication and growth. Even on social media, where shadows are broadcast, integration means pausing before reacting, asking, is my outrage about them or about me? Ethical integration demands slowing the cycle, transforming the energy into awareness rather than impulse. The practices in daily life. Journaling. Write daily what you resented, envied or feared. Then ask, what does this reveal about me? Mindfulness. Sit in silence. Observe emotions rise and fall without acting. Recognize, this is anger, this is envy, this is fear. Naming reduces power. Creative expression. Channel raw energy into art, writing, music, or physical movement. Dialogue. Seek mentors or communities where confession is possible. Shadows shrink when spoken aloud. Ethical reminders. Keep guiding principles visible, whether Stoic virtues, religious commandments, or personal codes. Integration without ethics is just indulgence. There is, however, a danger. Some mistake integration for indulgence, believing that to own the shadow means to act it out without restraint. But that is not integration, it is possession. The integrated man does not excuse cruelty as authenticity. He transforms cruelty into strength of will, selfishness into leadership, lust into creativity. As Jung warned, the shadow must not be rejected but also not embraced naively. It must be shaped. Integration is art, not surrender. The aim of integration is not perfection, but wholeness. To be whole is to be at peace with contradiction. To know one can be both gentle and fierce, humble and ambitious, compassionate and strong. Wholeness frees us from the exhausting masquerade of pretending to be only light. It makes us trustworthy, not because we are harmless, but because we are dangerous under discipline. Wholeness does not eliminate the monster. It seats the monster at the table, listens to its voice, and decides where its strength can be of use. We have now seen the path: honesty, projection, sublimation, ritual, and ethics. But this leaves one final step: the vision. What does life look like when one has truly owned the monster? What is the haunting but hopeful reality of living with shadow integrated? That is where we will turn in the conclusion, to the final reflection: how to own your monster without becoming its prey. How to live as whole without falling into villainy. The journey has brought us to a threshold. We have seen what the shadow is, how philosophers and psychologists mapped it, how villains are born when it is denied, and how ethical integration offers a way forward. But now the question becomes personal. What does it mean, here and now, to own your monster without becoming a villain? The truth is this: you will never destroy your shadow. It is not a parasite to be removed, nor a toxin to be cleansed. It is part of you, as real as your heartbeat, as old as your childhood wounds, as enduring as your desires. To spend your life trying to eliminate it is to waste your strength fighting yourself. Yet to surrender to it fully is to become consumed. The tyrant, the hypocrite, the abuser. Each is a man or woman who mistook indulgence for authenticity. They thought, "This is who I am," and so they unleashed cruelty, envy, and rage unchecked. They became villains, not because they had shadows, but because they refused to guide them. The answer lies in what Aristotle called the golden mean, neither repression nor indulgence, but mastery. The shadow must be seen, named, and given channels of expression. Anger becomes courage, desire becomes creativity, ambition becomes leadership. The energy remains, but the form changes. This is what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Enlightenment is not denial of darkness, but awareness of it. Only when you admit to yourself, "I am capable of cruelty," can you choose compassion. Only when you know, "I am tempted by power," can you choose service. To own your monster is to live with tension. Every day you will hear its voice. Take the easy road, give in to envy, seek revenge, pretend to be pure. But when you integrate, you do not silence that voice with lies. You answer it with wisdom. You say, "I hear you, I know your hunger, and I will feed you in a way that builds rather than destroys." This is why Stoic practices remain so relevant. Marcus Aurelius, burdened with power, wrote nightly to remind himself of humility, justice, and mortality. He owned his monster by speaking to it daily, guiding it like a rider guides a horse. Power did not vanish, it became discipline. An old Cherokee tale tells of a grandfather teaching his grandson about life. "Inside every person," he says, "are two wolves. One is anger, envy, greed, arrogance. The other is kindness, humility, courage, love. They fight within you." The boy asks, "Which wolf wins?" The grandfather replies, "The one you feed." But the shadow is not a wolf you can starve to death. To starve it is to make it feral, hungry, and dangerous. The wise man feeds both wolves, but teaches the darker one to hunt for him, not against him. The shadow wolf becomes ally, not enemy. We live in an age where shadows run rampant. Outrage is monetized, envy is broadcast, pride is marketed as virtue. Politicians weaponize fear, corporations manipulate desire. The world is ruled not by monsters integrated, but by monsters unleashed. This is why integration is not only personal, but political, cultural, civilizational. A society of individuals who own their monsters is a society less prone to hysteria, tyranny, and collapse. A man who owns his shadow cannot be easily manipulated by propaganda. A woman who owns her ambition cannot be seduced by false promises. Whole people cannot be ruled by half-truths. Owning your monster will cost you. It will demand honesty you may prefer to avoid. It will demand responsibility when excuses are easier. It will force you to face the parts of yourself that make you shudder. But the reward is freedom. Freedom from hypocrisy, from compulsions, from the exhausting charade of pretending to be all light. Freedom to act with clarity, because you know the enemy within and have made it your ally. Freedom to live not as a fractured self, but as a whole one. So let me ask you, what are you hiding? What desire, what fear, what wound crouches at your door? Have you denied it until it rules you? Have you unleashed it until it consumes others? Or will you learn the harder path, to see it, name it, integrate it? The monster will not go away, but it need not devour you. It can guard your treasure instead. It can be the dragon you ride rather than the one you fight. Power grows when you face what you hide. But wisdom is in giving that power ethical form. Without ethics, you are a villain. With ethics, you are whole. The journey of shadow integration is not quick. It will stretch across your life, but it is the difference between being mastered and being master, between living as a hypocrite and living as a whole, between being consumed by the abyss and becoming one who can gaze into it without falling. Own your monster, but do not become one. Now look at this. The most dangerous man is not the one who claims to have no darkness. It is the one who knows his darkness, commands it, and chooses, day after day, to wield it for creation rather than destruction. Be that man, be that woman, be whole.